and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of What's Happening. I'm George Binns, and this evening's guest is the president of the Beverly City Council, Paul Guanci. And as you can tell from the Zoom world, he's still working for a living. How you doing, Paul?
Great, George. Thanks again. It's always a pleasure to be on with you.
Well, I wanted to talk about the state of the city, and I thought it was going to be kind of mundane. Go through the budget and a few other things that are coming up. And I guess Monday night got a little different. He passed a resolution about essentially the health problem of the minorities.
Yeah, it was put in actually on Monday night by Council Flowers and Council Rand. It stated that racism was a public health issue. We accepted the resolution on Monday night, and then it was actually voted on last night, and I had a previous engagement, and I had planned last week for Councilor Rand to run last night's meeting, not knowing we had this resolution coming before us.
Yeah.
But from what I have heard, it did pass 8-0.
Yeah, that's what I saw this morning. Yeah. So what does this all mean? Anything?
I think that, obviously the situation in the country has made some local officials want to make the general public aware of issues like racism and sexism and other things known on a local level. And I know it's very important to Council Flowers and Councilor Rand. And it's important to Mayor Cahill and other members of the city council. And I think Council Flaherty said in the paper this morning, he said that while he didn't think, he wasn't sure if racism was a public health issue, he did acknowledge it was a problem. He didn't say specifically Beverly, but a problem in the country right now.
Yeah, well, I've seen some articles where, especially on TED, that have talked about the problems that some of the minorities have and leading to a very high level of stress. And the stress induces the wrong kind of hormones running around your body, and it takes a toll. And there is data that some of the minorities do have a lowest life expectancy. But I think at the other half of the game is, what are we going to do about it? It's nice to talk about these problems, but I know, yeah, we put another flagpole up and run another flag up on City Hall. I mean, where does this lead?
Yeah, that's the question. I mean, I know that the big thing across the country is defunding the police department. There were hints of doing that here in the city of Beverly this year. It didn't happen. The police budget passed as is. I know the chief has talked about more training and how to deal with people in racial situations and treating everybody equally. I think that we've done a good job treating people equally in Beverly for a number of years. And part of me thinks that the police department here in the city of Beverly has been vilified by an event that happened out in Minneapolis, where the police officers aren't trained or aren't educated as well as our police officers in Beverly and our surrounding communities.
Well, my take on the situation in Minneapolis is a game of finger pointing. The officer involved in that incident supposedly, and again, it's hearsay evidence, had 18 complaints against him. Okay, they got a system that registers complaints. The next question is, why wasn't something done about it? And the mayor gets on the line and says, well, I can't do anything because the union contract won't let me arbitrarily or with some sort of administrative move dismiss officers, fire them. But yet he's the guy that negotiates the contract. So there seems to be more to it than simply we got to train the police more. That's probably true. They probably need a little more awareness of the sensitivity. But at the same time, you've got to have an administration that's going to do something about it. And I don't see that in the works just yet. At least,
Yeah, it's very rare that you'll see somebody step up, an elected official step up and get involved in disciplinary action within the police department. I think that all really falls onto the chief.
yeah. And again, I'm not sure what prerogatives he has. Again, not knowing what the union contract says. So that's an issue that I
Well,
think,
you know what? Shame on the mayor of a big city like that, Minneapolis, with 2 million or 2.5 million people in the general metropolis. Your chief executive should know what's in that contract. I know Mayor Cahill will know what is on our police contract when it comes down to disciplinary action.
yeah. And that's the other part of the issue, I guess, is in a lot of these cities, they would have a protest march. I mean, Beverly has had a couple of protest marches. And we've been fortunate that nothing got out of hand. But in these other cities, things get out of hand and the word goes out to the police department to stand down. And I guess that's another issue, that if you're going to have a problem, then you got to do something about it. And
Yeah, what happened in those other cities is wrong. I mean, you can say that the cause of what happened forced those people into, I mean, you can never justify looting and burning and throwing bricks through small businesses' windows. It's, I mean, it's a travesty, and that's what you need police for, to keep situations like that in order. I mean, it's amazing what the mayor of Seattle let happen in her city. 7 blocks shut off from law enforcement. And then I know that a couple of people actually died in the, whatever it was called, the Chaz or the Chop Zone, because there was no response from emergency responders. I mean, is that the kind of world that we want to live in? I don't think so.
no. So I think the issue of defunding the police is definitely the wrong way to go. Yeah, there needs to probably be a little more attention paid to how the police operate. But at the same time, got to give the cops credit. They have a really tough job normally. And with these situations go on, it becomes extremely difficult. The one that really upset me was 2 officers in McLean, Texas, got called to a domestic dispute and they got shot. And the way the press reports it, sounds like it was an ambush. And I think this is another thing that has to be brought up at all levels of local government, especially. The cops need to be respected. They're doing a job. If you got a bad cop, get rid of them. But the rest of the cops are doing the best job that they can, and we don't need people making it worse for them. So there's a lot of issues involved, and I'm not sure what the answer is, but I think it needs a very strong municipal government to stand up and say, hey, you can't do this in my city.
Well, I mean, that's really what it is. I mean, you need a police force. You need them to be strong yet fair. You need them to follow the rules. But they're putting some very, very like you mentioned, the job is hard enough as it is. And I know a big part of the police reform bill that the Senate had passed 30-7 talks about education and de-escalation training. But, you and I have never been in that situation where you have to de-escalate somebody who's angry or violent or strung out on drugs. Police have to fear for their lives in a lot of situations. And it's not their fault. You can't vilify an entire department for the actions of 1 or 2 officers.
No, I did a show with the Reverend Emerald a while back. We were talking about an incident in Boston where a professor from not UMass, the Mass Art Academy, was walking across the parking lot, and the cop came up to him and said, "Where you going? Who are you?" And as the cop approached him, he's flipping off the little uh, keeper on his holster, so he's got his hand on the gun. And the guy was very nervous about it. He was African heritage, and it was his story, so he's telling him how he was in great fear of something going sour. And we got into the discussion, and the question came up of, well, aren't we all considered innocent until proven guilty? And the cop shouldn't have had his hand on the gun. But as you mentioned, that he doesn't know what he's walking into. He was out there looking for uh, a particular individual that had been uh, committing some sort of crime. And he doesn't know if this is the right one or not, and he can't take the chance. So he's got to be in a position so that he can go home that night to his family. And I think this is part of the issue of the cops deserve a certain amount of respect and a certain amount of deference that, hey, he's doing a job and he doesn't know what you are. So you may be terrified of seeing somebody show up with a gun, but he's probably just as nervous and upset about walking into a situation with an, an obvious criminal. So
Sure.
a lot of unknowns involved.
Right. I mean, you just referenced that story about in Texas. He didn't know he was answering a call for a domestic dispute, and how would he know what was going to happen next?
Yeah.
They have to be prepared.
And one of the other ones that bothers me is I've talked to a couple of police officers, and the impression I get is the worst call they have to make is to a domestic dispute because they're walking into a free-for-all and they don't know who's on what side.
Right.
And they're instantly thrown into the middle of it. And to expect that you're going to have somebody who is a social worker, unarmed, all by themselves, answer these kind of 911 calls, it's part of the foolishness I see in this defund the police. There's a lot of soft stuff involved. I don't think they've thought it through very deeply at all. And the reason I keep harping on it, I guess, is the group in Lynn had a big protest, and that was their motive to go after the city council in Lynn and convince them to defund the police. So do not want to see that happen in Beverly. That's part of my.
You look at a city like Lynn. I mean, Lynn has far more challenges and far more crime than we do here in Beverly. And how do you want to define the only people that are standing between you, innocent citizens, and those that want to do harm or do wrong?
Yeah. So
tough job, and I think you'll see less and less people want to go into law enforcement if rules are softened too much.
Well, a lot of the big cities are seeing a rash of people wanting to retire for exactly that reason. Hey, why should I put my life on the line or risk harm for a bunch of people that don't really care about me? And that's in itself is a long discussion that can go on indefinitely. But a couple other issues that have come up in the city is that passed the budget, 2.5% increase in taxes, and I guess the buzz on the Facebook is that, well, why didn't they cut the budget instead of raising it? And the argument comes back, well, you don't want to lay people off unnecessarily. And then the other argument comes back, yeah, but the people that have to pay this have already been laid off. So when you're getting into that kind of a discussion.
George, you just checked out for a sec.
Say again? Still there? What happened? Connection has gone unstable.
George, you just checked out the last minute.
Yeah, I know the connection went unstable and you went blank. But anyway,
you were talking about the budget and the
The
two and a
budget.
half.
So the question is, how do you rationalize raising the budget 2.5% when people are have to pay it are probably out of work or on short hours?
Well, this is the, I mean, you say it, this is the year. There are years in the past that we've looked at not going up 2.5%. This is the year, unfortunately, the city really needed it. We took unused money from the overlay account to balance this year's budget. We took out 1.1 million out of our city stabilization fund that we've been saving up, knowing that this year was going to be tough anyway, and it was more tough. Our state aid was cut almost 17%. We had a drop in excise tax, a drop in meals tax. So unfortunately, this is the year that the city really needed that 2.5% increase. And you always have to look at that budget. That budget is 85% fixed. Most of it is salaries, benefits, retirements. It's bodies. There's very little leeway with the rest of the money. And this year, the majority of the money went to the schools.
Yeah, that's the usual case. Yeah.
Yeah, and while there was a real buzz on Facebook about it, I know I had one of our former state reps reached out to another councilor, and he shared me her thoughts with it. And it was the same, why go up 2.5%? But when we had the public hearing for the budget, we had only one person, a member of the public, speak out about it. And it was actually the Ward 6 school committee representative, who usually is on the usually has something to say negatively about the budget, that we're not giving enough money to the schools. But she actually got up and praised Mayor Cahill, praised Brian Ailes and the council for passing a fair and reasonable budget, even though we're only able to give a little extra money to the school department.
Yeah. So it's going to be a tough battle, I think.
Yeah, the next 2 years are going to be tough.
And if they keep up with these kinds of spacing requirements, I'm not sure they can function as a school. And that was not for everybody in the city that needs to be there. Don't know what they're going to do.
It's going to be very different in September. I would envision some kind of a split day. Some days are spent in the classrooms, other days are at home. I would think that the school would be open every day, but not with the maximum amount of students.
Yeah, 2 shifts.
Yeah, 2 shifts, correct.
Yeah, they've done that before in some cities.
That work out though with the teachers and the union, and you may need more teachers or you may need less teachers. I don't envy the superintendent or the Department of Education during this time.
It's going to be a tough time. Yeah. Other things coming up in the near future is this Plan Beverly. And I've been on a kick. I've discussed it before that we need to have a complete city concept where everybody that works here can afford to live here. And you've mentioned before that some of your employees live pretty far away to get a place that they can afford. And at the same time, the motivation is more apartments around the train stations so we can take in the people that can't afford to live in Boston. And now that we've got a coronavirus problem, do we really want to import the virus from Boston too? You can throw that one into the hopper.
Yeah, I know that one is something that I didn't even think of.
Yeah, but at the same time,
here.
Yeah. So, and I know Andrew DeFrenza has mentioned several times that there are people on the waiting list to get into some of his affordable housing that just won't live long enough to get there. The list is that long.
Right.
And at the same time, this particular issue that came up Monday night and got passed last night of the health issues involved with so-called racism also implies that there need to be better housing for people of minorities are really people who are not making the greatest of salaries. So is there any feeling on the board or in your mind that something needs to be done about zoning to make it more attractive or palatable?
Well, we already have, we have the inclusionary housing ordinance that we passed a number of years ago that requires developers to either build affordable housing in their new developments or pay into the Beverly Affordable Housing Trust to help others build affordable housing. I mean, it's worked pretty well, and I know Harbor Light Community Partners with Andy DeFranco has taken advantage of it. They have a nice 6-unit building on Hardy Street down by the train station. That was actually put together by money donated by Beverly Crossing to the Affordable Housing Trust, who built a number of the buildings on Rantoul Street. But I mean, we're trying. I mean, look at Briscoe. Briscoe is going to be affordable senior housing, 85 units. We have that development, Anchor Point, up on Sawyer Road that will be for low-income families and homeless. You just got to think about how much room is there to put it here in the city of Beverly. There's got to be some kind of a balance.
And I think that one of the problems that we're going to face very quickly is that with the cost of land, it's awful hard to come up with a single family kind of building anywhere in town.
Right.
I know the neighborhood where I'm living, I believe the assessed value of the property, it's worth about $1 million an acre. And when you're spending that much for the land, you're not going to be able to put a very inexpensive house on it, even if you go to more expensive zoning. Where do you go? So it's got to be.
Nobody's building 2-bedroom capes or ranches anymore.
Say again?
Nobody's building any, Campanelli ranches like up in Raymond Farms or 2-bedroom capes.
Yeah. So it's going to mean there's going to have to be some sort of multifamily buildings. And one of the articles I've read has been pushing, we ought to go back to 3-deckers, because that's a way to not only get more people into a zone, but it also is a mechanism to start to develop some wealth, because you buy a 3-decker and you rent out the top 2 floors. I mean, that was the approach for a lot of people to escape from the low rent district. And once they had owned a couple of buildings, they could move out and become land barons.
Sure, but you can't get a decent 3-family in the city of Beverly now for less than $1 million.
Yeah.
That third unit really makes it. It used to make it attractive for a building. Has actually priced them out.
Yeah. So there's got to be some different approach somewhere. And I guess the risk is you build one of these affordable complexes, and you run the risk of it turning into something that has to be torn down 10 years later, like Cabrini Green or Eagle Pru or the problems they had at Columbia Point in Boston. So it's a tough balance, and I don't see anything in this Plan Beverly that really tries to address that. Yeah, so we can jam a bunch of buildings down around the railroad tracks or railroad station, but after that, I don't know what the deal is. But the other thing I wanted to touch base on, we mentioned that we talked about a little earlier. There's going to be a charter commission, or there is one, and they're going to review the charter.
We're going to review the charter. Yeah, they'll start in September. I mean, COVID has definitely put them on the slow track, but Councilor Flaherty, who's going to chair the committee, is ready to go in September.
What do you think the direction ought to be? What's the talk?
I think that they'll look at a 4-year term for the mayor. They'll look at possibly a city manager form of government. They may want to look at it and give the city council more power. Power was taken away from the city council when the new charter was enacted back in 2000.
Yeah.
So those I think would be the big things.
Yeah, we had a discussion with Councilor Flaherty a week or so ago on this subject, and he was concerned that you get a city manager in there and you're stuck with them for a while. And if you have a mayor type of system, then come the next election, you can vote him out if he's not doing a good job, or vote him in. But I think as a city manager is a employee hired by the city council,
Right.
so that if things are not going well, the city council has to make the decision that time for a change. So it's
Sure.
not a locked-in system that you're stuck with. I guess depends on what kind of a contract you sign with them.
Well, usually they sign their contracts for 2 or 3 years. Usually it's 3 years for a city or a town manager because it goes by the election cycle, which is every 2 years. And it works. I mean, the city of Cambridge has a city manager. The president of the council serves as the mayor. If you look out to Worcester, Worcester's had a city manager for years. Tim Murray, our former lieutenant governor, was president of the city council, which was also, he used mayor as his title there. They can work. Remember, a city manager is qualified by education. They've got their masters in public administration or some other form of government. So they're trained. Take a look at what one of my colleagues, former colleague Jason Silva, did.
Yeah.
He went to school. He was on the city council, did a nice job for 6 years. Always interested in public service. Went and got his public administration master's, and now he's the town manager in Marblehead. And you look at Kevin Hartunian, who was the mayor's, definitely the mayor's strongest hire when he took office. He ran around like a maniac for 6 years. He had his fingers in every project, but all the while he was working on his master's degree in public administration. Lo and behold, Topsfield reached out to him. He didn't even apply for the job.
Oh, wow, that's impressive.
Yeah, they reached out to him, saw what he was doing in Beverly, and said, "Hey, would you like to come here and run the show?" And it was an opportunity he couldn't pass up.
Yeah.
Getting somebody who's trained, whereas you could elect a mayor who has no background in any kind of city, any kind of government.
Yeah. And I think the other thing within the two cases you mentioned, both of them had been studying how to run a city up close and personal, and while they're getting a master's degree. So it's not just strictly academic background, it's a lot of personal experience as well.
They got hands-on training too.
Yeah, exactly. So as I check the clock on the computer here, we've had a half hour of fun, believe it or not.
It always goes so fast with you. It really drags when Elliot is on, but it goes fast when it's just you, George.
Yeah. Okay. So thanks again, Paul. And as I mentioned with Jim Flaherty, with the other meeting we had, since this is one of these years when you guys are not running for re-election, and you don't have to end the show with a 5-minute "please vote for me" routine. Would like to get you on again later in the season, see how things are going, and let people know what the pulse of the city is on a continuous basis.
I'd love to be, and hopefully next time we'll be in the studio. And it's even though it's not an election year, I think you'll find in September people talking about the election next year. So
yeah, and like you mentioned, there's a lot of stuff going on in the city that I think everybody should be aware of and have a chance to put their 2 cents worth in.
Of course.
Thanks again, Paul. Appreciate it.
Thank you. We'll see you soon. Be safe.
And ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us this evening. And we'll be having a few more shows like this. Stay tuned.